My guest today is Deirdre Tshien. She's the founder and CEO of Capshow, an AI copywriting software for podcasters. She's also the mastermind behind the Grow My Podcast Summit and the author of Honey Traps Marketing. In this episode, we discuss how she gets her podcast listeners to take the actions she wants them to, how to leverage human curiosity to drive traffic to your podcast from your social media accounts, what type of lead magnets work when appearing as a guest on a podcast and what don't, and how beginners can implement Deirdre's framework and earn honey traps in their content very easily, and so much more. Enjoy. Hi, Deirdre. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm pumped to have this chat with you.
I'm pumped as well. So today I wanted to chat with you about your podcast to email list funnel. I have a performance marketing background, so I'm familiar with the concept of funnels, but it was the first time that I see something like this concrete, dedicated to podcasting. And I thought it was pretty brilliant in its simplicity and its effectiveness to bring your audience down that funnel to your goal. So just to briefly present it, so at the very top, you have all the marketing activities that you run with the goal to bring all this audience to your final goal, which is to turn them into email subscribers to your list. And along the way, for all of the steps in this funnels, everything is powered by what you call honey traps. You've actually written a book about this called Honey Trap Marketing. Do you want to give us a rundown of the concept?
Yeah, for sure. And where I'd start is almost people's intent with their podcast, because I know that people get into podcasting for a whole host of different reasons, especially when they're looking to monetize for a business that they have. For example, some people just have a podcast that they can get guests on who they can actually pitch to, so that they're getting guests on who are their ideal audience. So the people that we're talking about for this particular strategy are those entrepreneurs who are using a podcast to actually nurture an audience, to actually attract listeners who, again, are their ideal audience, and to nurture them into, their email list, but ultimately into a sale of some sort. So just wanted to preface that that's kind of who this strategy is for. And when I talk about honey traps, it's actually really stupidly simple and not at all super original. By way of the point of honey traps, really, in short, is just to create curiosity. The reason why this for me was a bit of a light bulb moment, even though I've been in marketing for a long time, and I'm sure you would agree with this as well, that it's not, when you hear it and you hear the definition, it's actually not a new thing that we're exposed to. But I remember that when I was struggling, when I had my first podcast, and I just could not figure out how to get people to listen to it, and then how to actually get them to move from being a listener to actually being someone who I could actually, quote unquote, sell to. And I was in a mastermind session with Russell Brunson, who's the co-founder of ClickFunnels. And he was saying, he was answering this particular question around what makes people show up to a webinar. So different context, right? But, they were talking webinars. And he basically just said the only thing that will get people to show up is curiosity, like raw curiosity. So if you can compel someone in that way to be like, oh my God, you've opened this loop for them, and we're human. So every loop that gets open, we need to close it. That's actually what gets people to show up. And so when I was listening to that, I was like, oh my gosh, at the time I was struggling with this whole podcast thing, and how do I actually get people moving in the, through the journey that I want them to. And that for me was a bit of a light bulb moment, which is stupidly simple, right? It's we all know that curiosity, or we should know that curiosity is the thing that hooks us in, but I just forgot. I forgot about that. And so that's why I started really nerding out on what I now call content honey traps, and trying to formulate, work out what is, because it's so easy for us to be create curiosity. It's well, great. How do we create curiosity like this? When we're not practiced at it, it's actually really hard. And so I created 8 mental models that we can think through to actually create that curiosity. And that's what I've actually termed the content honey traps. And I don't know if you want me to go briefly into what those 8 look like, but I can do that now, or we can do that after.
Actually, I'm going to use a honey trap right now for our own audience. But so your funnel is fairly simple once you've seen a visualization of it. And I've drafted a flow chart. I've asked our designer to create a proper version because I can't draw for the life of me. And have added it to the show notes. So I actually encourage the audience to go to the show notes, click on the link in the show notes to go visualize it and follow along as you're talking us through the steps. And so at the very top of the funnel, as I mentioned, you have all these marketing activities that you can run, like social media or guesting on podcasts, etc., etc. And can you give us examples of honey traps, on social media, for example? You talked about curiosity. How do you elicit curiosity on social media?
Yes. Okay, cool. So I'll kind of talk through even some of the mental models as well that we've kind of come up with. So the one and this will help answer the question, I promise. But I was at this event, 18 months ago now. And it was one of those events where there were a lot of sessions that were being held. And so there was a full agenda. And so you had to pick which ones that you wanted to go to. And there was one particular one that stood out to me. And it was titled something like, How I Made $1 Million with a $19 Product and a Toilet Seat. And you kind of go like, wow, I've got to go watch that session. And it was a packed session. And it's no surprise because the hook, the title, created so much curiosity. And when I looked and I broke that sort of what was happening there down, that created one of my mental models inside the content honey traps, which we call the paradox. And so this is where you intrigue your audience by contrasting a big result, so $1 million, with something that was surprising as to how you got there. So again, $19 product and toilet seat. So when I sort of broke that down, I actually tested it. So at the time, I had just interviewed Angela Taylor, and she's a coach who was doing 6 figures in her business, working only 45 hours a month. So not a week, like a month. And so that's what I was like, oh my gosh, that's the paradox. So I created, my whole social media campaign, the way that I promoted it was with that paradox mental model. And so that was what we did, what we used. And we saw our downloads. That was one of our biggest spikes. I think it was something like 2.5 times what we were, on average sort of doing before that. I even had people at the time, I was a coach for e-commerce businesses. I had one of the big e-commerce gurus actually reach out by DM and was like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to listen to this episode. And so that was, for me, I was like, oh, this works. The more that we can use content honey traps, especially at the top of the funnel, but we'll talk about how we can use it throughout the funnel. That is actually what hooks someone in and what has them being like, I have to go close that loop, right? I have to go work out how is that this person is only able to work 45 hours a month. Can I do that too?
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting what you just said about, opening the loop and then making it impossible for people to resist to close that loop. I think another example you mentioned in your content is for example, in your social media posts, mention things that don't work and then let people know, you reveal what actually works if they click and listen to the episode, for example.
Yeah, that's the boxer. That's what we call the boxer. And that's exactly right. Yeah, you go, what are the myths essentially that you hear about something, and what is actually the truth. That's a great way to hook someone in. So just in short, I just want to provide more context around these the mental models of the content honey traps, because we have 8. 4 were designed to be around the story that gets told, because generally for most of us, if we're doing our podcast right, we have the stories that get told, and then we have the tips or the value that gets shared. And so for stories, the 4 mental models that we have are things like the cliffhanger, which is, tried and true. That's how all soap operas have been able to be around for decades. And that's really when you leave you leave someone hanging, and so you don't tell them the rest of the story. You don't give them reveal the big secret. There's the paradox that I already mentioned. There's the big reveal where you lure your audience in by hinting at some kind of unexpected twist in the story, like, oh my god, you won't guess how this happened, or and things like I find reality TV does that really well. Right? And then there's the sharer, where you whet your audience's appetite for the full details of your story by giving away the ending. So you actually give away the ending. And again, a lot of like action movies and things do this, where they kind of start at the end or near the end or somewhere in the middle, and then they kind of go, well, 4 months before, and they give you the journey to that point. So that's the story part. And then the tips part, there's another like the value component, there's another 4 mental models. One you picked up, which is the boxer. The boxer is where you're agitating pain points that they're feeling. And then you have the solution, obviously, again, tried and tested thing. And then we have the jaw dropper, where you are enticing your audience by teasing a secret that you're delving into. So the one secret to XYZ. I just recorded a podcast episode actually that was like the one secret to growth, to growing anything, whether it's a podcast audience, whether it's a business. And then the last one is the marvel, where you are enticing your audience by teasing a framework. So like content honey traps. Oh, like what is that? I need to know what that means. So that's just a really quick rundown of the 8.
Okay, like slap a nice marketing name on a concept, and then attract the audience this way. Got
exactly.
It. Okay. And so once you've attracted your audience to your podcast and got them to listen to one of your episodes, how do you then move them to the next steps? How do the honey traps look like at that stage?
Yeah, cool. Okay, so what I do for my podcast, and it was again, when I started trying to do this, I would have some kind of lead magnet. So it would be like a cheat sheet or a checklist or something. And it was okay, but it wasn't really like great. And I was on my own mastermind call with a group of Capshovians, people who use Capsho. And interestingly, one of my members, so Adam, he was saying that since using Capsho, he's seen his email open rates skyrocket. So he was doing on average maybe 23% opens. Since using Capsho subject lines, it was like at 66%. But he said, even though the open rates had increased so much, he didn't find that the listeners were moving. The listen numbers. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. Let's talk through that. Like, we need to work out what the root cause is. And I was like, well, how are you getting people onto your email list? And he was like, well, I have like a checklist. It comes up on my website and things like that. And the more I thought about it, the more that I was like, so when we use a lead magnet, generally that is something like a checklist, something that's a little bit, it's written, it's for a bit of a different purpose. And then we try to promote a podcast. A lot of times we don't realize that they're quite disconnected in terms of a podcast listener is a certain type of person. They like audio. Then probably they don't need the visual elements. Whereas someone who downloads a cheat sheet or a checklist is a visual learner. They need the thing in front of them to follow along and read. And so that got me thinking about, even for myself, and I tested it. So I was like, okay, how can I create a lead magnet that is, if my outcome, if my goal is to get people to listen to my podcast ongoing, so when I promote a podcast, they'll want to listen to it. If that was my goal, then how do I actually attract listeners? So audio people. And so I started testing it. So what I did was I think it was an episode that I did with Kevin Schmidlin. It was a great episode because he's so tangible in his value, in his tips. But there was one thing that he said, and I was like, I need to come back to this. So he was mentioning that what was the thing? Oh, that he doesn't believe that guest episodes work as well. And it was just a throwaway line that he was saying in amongst things. So at the end of the episode, I actually came back to that. I was like, hey, Kevin, you mentioned this. can you go a bit deeper into why you say that and what you suggest and what you recommend and what you're doing now? And so he did. And what I did was I actually clipped that part and I made it a bonus clip, completely free. And in the episode, because I do mine a little bit narrated, but you can definitely do this even if you record your own like intro and outro. Then I used Content Honey Trap. So again, I opened the loop about that particular topic, very tangible, tactical topic. And I said, if you want to listen to it, head over to my show notes and grab that free bonus clip. And that was when we actually started seeing like a lot, like first double digits. Now it's like high double digits of people actually opting in to that lead magnet. And those are people who are audio in nature as well. Yes, they, however they discovered my podcast, but if I can get them onto my email list and if I can keep promoting my podcast to them, they're going to keep coming back. And that's what we've seen. We've seen sustained increases in our listeners.
Very interesting. I mean, now that you say it, it's almost obvious, right? But I wouldn't have thought of this, like gating audio content, as you said, like these like podcast listeners are probably auditive learners, and so flowcharts and this kind of stuff is probably, or checklists is probably not as attractive, and it kind of like ties into also the fact that many podcast marketers say podcast to podcast marketing is very effective because you don't move people from a medium to another, but to keep them within the same medium.
Yes.
And so that's the same spirit, like keep people in the audio or video medium, let's say, but that's the most effective way to go about things. So you get them to click on a link in the episode description, either on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, to get to your website, to get their free episode or the free segment. Do you do they see the content right away when they land on the landing page, and do you ask for their email address afterwards, or do they only get to see the bonus content once they've signed up?
Yeah. Okay. So now we get into what I used to call the show notes, but I think that it seems a bit confusing. So I'll call it the podcast website content, because there's like the description in the podcast player, as you said, in the Spotify or iTunes. And I only ever have one link in my description, which is to my podcast website content. And that's where I put all of the resources and all the links and all the other things. So on the podcast website content, let's talk about how I structure this, because everything again is about content honey traps all throughout. So and also content honey traps and also SEO. So discoverability, we really try to merge those two together. And so what I do is my first paragraph, which I will generally put above the actual media player on that website, is a content honey trap. So again, one of the 8 mental models, depending on what is most appropriate for that particular topic of the episode that I just recorded, that's what I start with. And that's designed specifically to get people to keep reading. So if we think about, again, like we talk about funnels and, this funnel that we're going through is kind of a high level funnel, but even at each step, there's like a micro funnel. So when you think about your website content, even that in and of itself is a funnel. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to move people down the page so that they get to the important call to actions. So for me, the way that I think about it is, okay, what are the things that people actually want to stay for, right? So they want to stay for seeing almost like the interesting behind the scenes things. So I generally will try to bring a lot of human element to, especially if they're interviews. A lot of times people that I interview, I've probably met in some way at some event, maybe some podcasting event or something. I would have taken a selfie with them. So I will actually put a photo, a really raw selfie that was taken with the two of us. I'll put other images that I can about what it is they're doing, or if I've seen them in other contexts. or if they've shared, other images with me, I'll actually seed all of that. So it's very much like any SEO fundamentals that we hear around rich media. That's what I put onto this website content. And the thing is, because all like things like images, things that break up, paragraphs, that's what draws the eyes, like the reader's eye. And so we want to keep them going down until they see the exclusive bonus content bit. And the exclusive bonus content, again, content hunting trap, that's how we framed it. We will create curiosity in that paragraph to be listen to this, and then it's leading into listen to this bonus clip. So when they click on that link, yes, there's an opt-in page. So they just put their email in, and then they can access that audio clip and listen to it then and there for free.
Okay, got it. So yeah, it's pretty advanced, right? Like you don't just put the sign up form at the very top of the page. You first like kind of preheat the listeners, like get them excited about this with the content that you post, like the pictures, as you said, and like the goal is to move them down the page and more excited about the bonus, right? Have you A/B tested this, like just having the sign up form at the very top versus adding all this exclusive content, like the selfies, etc., and the sign up form at the bottom? What kind of improvement have you seen there?
I mean, we haven't, and the reason why we haven't, and that I should never say never, because we probably should. But the big reason why is because the website content, we design it to be discoverable as well. So we're kind of mixing two audiences in a way, which I know is not ideal, and any marketer will be like, "Why are you doing that?" But because the website content is one from an SEO, and that's why we do have the rich media as well. It's designed to get discovered. It's designed to actually rank on to the search engines. So we actually have like new audience coming in, and and that we want to discover the actual podcast and that episode. But then we also do have existing audience who've just listened to the episode coming in, wanting to access things like the bonus content and things like that. So we're kind of it's relatively short still because we want people to just get to the CTAs, but we also want to be able to pre-frame either new listeners, or, to your point, even existing listeners to actually listen or get the bonus. So yeah, we're kind of mixing the two, but we should, I think we need to figure out a way, if we were to split it, what would that do to our opt-in rates?
Understood. Okay, but for now, like these pages are multi-purpose landing pages, so for your SEO traffic and your podcast listeners. So
yes,
that definitely makes sense. I wanted to ask what tools you use to capture the emails, right? Like you're a successful founder, you have a company. So I'm guessing for a company like Capsho, you probably use a different software that you would be using if you were like a hustler grinding as a solo, solo content creator, right?
Yes.
What are your recommendations for both?
Yeah, so we actually have literally just moved over to HubSpot. So talking about scaling, that's kind of the from a Capsho perspective, that's what we use. We're actually working with ConvertKit around for creators, a really great email marketing tool for them, for creators. So we're actually working with ConvertKit about how it is that, based on Capsho's email outputs that we generate for our users, how it is that can be really easily and simply, brought over to ConvertKit, and how ConvertKit has the smarts and the ways that they can actually, it's really cool that some of the tools that they're building for creators around building communities and actually incentivizing, newsletter signups and cross promoting, and it's really cool what they're doing. So we're actually working with them to bring some of that to life for our audience as well.
Okay, so I want to talk about the conversion rates. You already mentioned some numbers, but I just want to sum them up for the listeners. Once they start leveraging this tactic, they should be seeing conversion rates in the double digits. And once they've optimized and dialed in their lead magnets, they should be seeing somewhere something in the high double digits. Can you mention is it high double digits, like 30%, 40%, 50%? How much are we talking about?
This is super interesting. So because every time I ask about rates as well, I'm like, just give me a number, and people are like, well, it depends. It's like it's it's more trend based, because we all have such different audiences. We all have such different numbers. So it's, and also, to be fair, what I'm talking about, we've really only been doing this for, I would say, about 6 months. So this is just full transparency. So it's not like we have a lot of data that we can be like, yeah, this is the thing. What I would say, and this just comes back to, I think, just sort of some fundamentals, is that you always want to just be tracking it from the perspective of your trend line. Because I can't confidently say that these are benchmark numbers, because I don't have enough data across enough audience, types of podcasts and types of audience to confidently say that. But how I look at it is like, if I can increase it week on week or month on month or whatever your frequency is, then that's a good sign. Everything is all about everything to do with optimization is just about increasing, on yourself, really. So that's our aim all the time, and that's what I would recommend others do, because we all have definitely different listener numbers and types of listeners as well. For me, I would say, because I actually speak specifically to entrepreneurs who podcast, that they are probably more. Actually, I don't know if this is the truth. See, this is why it's a really interesting thing. I would say that entrepreneurs, by and large, are probably more used to opting in for things, and so I would hypothesize, I don't know whether I'm right about this, that I might swing towards the higher versus someone who might be speaking to and I know that there are a lot of people in like the mental wellness space, and like they're coaching that space. I don't know, actually. I haven't actually looped back with them to see exactly what their opt-in rates are, but I would hypothesize, I might be totally wrong, that might be a little bit lower than what I might see. So it really just depends on, your audience type, the type of content that you have, how well you're creating curiosity. I still practice it and learn all the time. But the goal really with conversion rates is just to be, if you can see an upward trend, then you're on the right track, and you just want to keep dialing that in.
Okay, so you got these people to move from the very top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel, and now they're subscribed to your email list. And of course, as you mentioned, you want to maybe sell them something or get something out of them, maybe, get them to re-engage with your content. But how do you deliver value to them? How do you make sure that they keep engaged with your email list? Because that's a super important thing to have, like a strong, vital.
Yes. The number one rule is to actually email. That's the funny thing is, I was speaking to Alex Sanfilippo, who's the founder of PodPros, who has Podbatch, etc. And he was like, he has a big email list, and he was saying to me one day, he was like, he's like, I don't really email my list. I was like, what? You're sitting on a gold mine. And he said, yeah, because he's like, every time I email them, he'll get like some negative. He'll be like, oh, they'll get responses like, who are you? I don't. And I was like, because you don't email them. And this is the thing. We get told to build an email list. And so we're like, yep, tick, building an email list. But then we don't actually do the next step of actually have them, engaging with you through frequency. So yeah, we build this email list, but we actually don't end up emailing them. Now, I probably am on the other end of the spectrum where I do email a lot. I email 4 times a week. But the great thing is, and I get a lot of unsubscribes as well, by the way, which is totally cool, because I want to have a really clean subscribed list, people who want to hear from me. And so what I do in terms of from a content perspective, and what Capture actually really helps people with, is what I call content dripping. So when I have a podcast, my podcast episode goes live on every Tuesday. So I'll always email out and I'll dedicate just one email to the fact that this podcast episode's live. Obviously, it doesn't say those words, but that's a message in that particular email. And then I actually create other long form content pieces from my podcast. So I'll do a blog post, and I'll do a YouTube video, and I'll drop those not on the same day as the podcast. I'll actually drop one a week after, and then one the week after that. So if you can imagine when you're in this cycle, and especially if you have a team helping you, because it's really hard when you're like a solo podcaster, you would have a podcast go live, you would have a YouTube video that go live from a podcast episode that was like 2 weeks ago, you would have a blog post go live that was from a week ago. So you're at least from just your podcast, you're creating 3 pieces of long form content every week and launching that. And that's what I actually end up emailing. I email my newsletter subscribers about that. And now I email them about other things too, like Capture and what's happening in the software. And I email them about other events that I've been to and just like fun life updates. Well, I think it's fun. I don't know if anyone else thinks they're fun. So I'll email them about different things. But ultimately, a lot of that content is anchored in just my podcast content. And then I just use my content dripping strategy to actually, create that know, like, and trust through even more touch points with my audience.
So for our audience, because I know personally as a listener, I hate to have to go back to the beginning of an episode to listen to things that I, didn't properly retain. Could you summarize again the 5 mental models that you mentioned at the beginning of the episode?
Yeah. 8 mental models.
Oh, 8. Okay.
There were 8,
My
but that's
bad.
okay. So, because I know that this is a lot. So I'll just rattle them off by name because I think and honestly, even if it's okay for me to say that even on my podcast, Grow My Podcast Show, episodes 1 and 2, I actually go into each of the 8. So I'll rattle them off now. And if anyone wants a kind of a deep dive, Grow My Podcast Show, episode 1 and 2 to listen to it in more detail. But just for context, so the mental models for the content honey traps are split into 2 types. There's one that's around the story part of your podcast, and there's one around the value part of your podcast. So the 4 that's for the stories, they're called the paradox, the cliffhanger, the big reveal, and the sharer. And the 4 for the values part of your podcast episode is called the rebel, the jaw dropper, the marvel, and the boxer. And how you decide which one you use is really depending on your episode and what you want to share about. Like if the story was so compelling in that podcast episode, use one of the story-based ones. If the value was just so mind-blowing, then use one of the value mental models. So yeah, I hope that kind of cleared up. There's 8 and that's how they're positioned.
How can beginners, leverage your funnel and your mental models? You mentioned leveraging curiosity, and I think we've all experienced, those maybe clickbait headlines, those small snippets at the end of articles, the Outbrain and Taboola, like this is how so-and-so looks like at 56, or like this is so-and-so's net worth, this kind of stuff. So we've already experienced it from a receiver point of view, but how can beginner implement it? What are your tips there?
Yeah, so if you're a beginner, it is overwhelming. Everything comes with practice, but if you also don't have the time and the will to take the time to learn it, then just use Capsho. Capsho, so it's CAPSHO, capsho.com, because we actually built Capsho off the back of these content honey traps. So everything that I've spoken about is actually inbuilt into the software. That's the power of it. It was built by marketers, so it is very much with a marketing mindset. And just really quickly, what does Capsho do? It is for podcasters or YouTubers, really any kind of longer form, either audio or video content. You would upload that into Capsho, and we generate your title, description, your podcast website content, your social media captions, your email, your blog post, your LinkedIn article, your YouTube description. It pulls out quotes, all so that you have everything you need from a content marketing, like an organic content marketing perspective, to actually share your message, share your podcast, amplify your voice. That's what Capsho does.
Got it. Yeah, as you mentioned earlier in the episode, it's tough for solo podcasters when you don't have a team. And so Capsho in that sense is a sort of a team that you can outsource this kind of work to.
100%. Yes, it's there to augment you. That's the other thing that I really want to be clear about, because it is powered by AI. And AI is not there to replace you, and it should not be replacing you. You've got to be involved in the process. So it'll get you, 80, 90% of the way there, but you have to be involved in that last 10 to 20 to 30% to really make it yours.
All right. That was it. I really want to thank you for coming on the show. I'm sure the listeners got a ton of value out of it. I myself did, so I'm sure the listeners did as well. Where can people follow you and find you? I'm outside of Cap Show.
Yeah. So we actually have something really cool. If you are a podcaster who wants to get your podcast discovered, so I know I spoke a little bit about things like SEO, for example, for the podcast website content, things like there's like in-app SEO, which Voxelize they're just masters at. And I actually was saying at the beginning of this call that we actually mentioned Voxelize quite a few times, and we linked to one of their blog posts. But so we actually have a resource that really quickly shares how to really optimize for in-app search, but also search engine search, so Google. And so you can grab that. It's a free gift, and you get an extended free trial of Capshow with it as well. So that's at freegift.capshow.com. So that's the best way to come and check out what it is that we do and learn about search discoverability. And if you want to get in touch with me personally, I'm Deirdre Tshien, which is like the easiest name, by the way, to spell. It's DeirdreTshien. On pretty much any platform. I am most active on LinkedIn and Facebook, so come find me over there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.